Hi, Gabby. How are you?
Hi, Miriam. Fine, thank you. And you?
Good. I'm fine, thanks. Well, let's talk about language acquisition. Uh, I would like to tell you that it's very important part of life. Communication between people not only enables us to understand one another, but helps in the developing relationship and allow us to communicate our problems, suggestions, and plans. Language is more than words, and it is also when words are put together. The ability to use fluent by language, we do not mean exclusively words, but the grammar that we use to put them together to produce words that reflect our impressions of our life, experiences, and environment, as well as to affect people and events around us. Therefore, one can learn hundreds of words in a foreign language and still be unable to manage even a simple conversation. According to Noam Chomsky, speakers of a language have a substantial body of proportional knowledge of that language that they draw upon a language production and comprehension. This reference is from Chomsky, 1986, Knowledge of Language, Its Nature, Origin, and Use. Language acquisition has four concepts. Condition of acquisition. This is described as continuous exposure to language information. This information is not controlled. Example, a child learner is exposed to the performance of an adult speaker of language he is acquiring. The second concept is the logical problem of acquisition. The logical problem of acquisition is that it will seem impossible to learn anything about a certain language without first already knowing something about language in general. That is, the child must know what to expect in language before he can actually order the information he is presented with his surroundings and attributes meaning to words and counters. The third concept will be how is language transmitted. Language is clear passed on from parents to their children, but on closer inspection, one notices that it is the performance in the technical sense of the previous generation which is used as the basis for the competence of the next. In basic terms, children do not have access to competence to their parents. On concept number 4, it's stages of language acquisition. This concept has two stages, which is competence and performance. The first stage is according to Chomsky and his aspects of the theory of syntax in 1965. This is the abstract ability of an individual to speak the language which he has learned as native language in his childhood. The competence of a speaker is genuine by such a factor of nervousness, temporary loss of memory, speech errors, etc. These last facts are entirely within the area of performance, which refers to the process of applying one's competence in the act of speaking. Bear in mind that competence also refers to the ability to judge if a sentence is grammatically well formed. It is an unconscious ability. The next stage is performance, is the actual production of the language as opposed to the knowledge about the structure of one's native language which is a speaker has adopted during childhood. In my own words, Gabby, I would like to mention some important tips for teachers that can use for language learners. First, to work to establish a positive classroom environment with low stress and anxiety so that English language learners are comfortable practicing their language, asking questions and interacting with you and their peers. Another point that I have in my own words, I will say that another tip is to get to know your learners, especially with regards to their language proficiency levels. That way you can tailor the content and language of your lessons to the right level of input and output.
Well, Miriam, I really like what you say. And regarding the last thing that you mentioned about the input and the output, one of the major, for so to say, like one of the major persons that have developed this theory or this whole methodology of language acquisition is Stephen Krashen. And after reading and analyzing some of his videos, and actually after reading and watching some of his conferences and listening to him, I could actually put that together to like our real life and what we face in our classrooms as teachers and even as human beings, because Mr. Krashen states in an interview he had in 1987, which comes after his book, that we all learn language, we all acquire language only one way. And what he meant only about one way is that we acquire it by being surrounded by it, being in context of its use. For example, when he mentions this, that we learn language only one way, and he meant any language, because during that conference, I remember he was giving, well, he gave us a little previous lesson of German. And at first, he developed the conference. I think most of my classmates will relate to this because it was a topic we saw at the beginning of our BA, which was language acquisition by Stephen Krashen. Um, he starts giving out this speech type of thing, like a lesson in German, and honestly none of us did understand anything. And then he asked if we understood something, and well, the answer was no. After that, Mr. Krashen gave the same lesson, but with he drew the parts of, he was talking about the parts of our body, he was talking about the ears, the face, about the eyes and nose. And after him doing all this kind of mimicking ways, and by drawing, we all understood without him saying those exact words in English, because he was teaching German at the time. And I guess he like made us realize how language acquisition is possible. Just like we don't acquire language, well, here we're talking about acquiring a second language will be English, because our students are basically Spanish. Their first language is Spanish, and we want to teach them English. Or like us, when we like maybe we grew up with Spanish, but eventually learned English because we were surrounded by it. We were surrounded by what he called a comprehensible input. We comprehended things by observing, by seeing them, and by actual practicing them. Because he says that we acquire language the same, everyone the same way, which I guess he will mean by being surrounded by it. And how we said, how he also states that we acquire our mother tongue being exposed to the language. Here, what language acquisition is, when we are exposed to the language we want to learn, and we basically take it to what we call practice. He also there's another point, a good point, that it says that grammatical, we don't necessarily need to teach grammatical structures in order for a student or anyone to learn the language, for it to learn it. Like I said before, grammatical comes after we have a percentage of domination in the language. Otherwise, I believe, I'm also good with Mr. Krashen when he says that how can we teach language focusing on grammar? I'm not saying grammar is not important, because it is very, as individuals we can acquire any language the same way which speakers are concerned, not with the form of their uterus, but with the messages they are convening and understanding. Mr. Cashin states that in 1987 as well. And I actually agree with that, because as the program we have as teachers, we don't like only focus on grammar. Like I mentioned before, it's important, but we focus on our students to actually understand what we want to communicate to them, because eventually the purpose of us learning a new language is because we want to learn how to communicate in it, like actually speak it, not just write it, because that's where grammar fits in more into like our writing and reading interaction with it. And I actually think that's really important in my opinion, because how I acquired English, my first language was Spanish, and I acquired English by being surrounded by the language. Like I didn't have people giving me translation or anything like that. I like
Like
Like I
listening.
acquire without even knowing it, just by listening to it and seeing, oh well, if they say it's a boy, probably at first I didn't know what a boy was, but then they pointed to a male like mate of me, like, oh well, the boy, it's a male figure, and I'm a girl, I'm a female. And to me that's really important, because it's basically what Mr. Krashen states is that not just because all our brains work together, but in certain stuff we have to go through the same process in order to learn it. How we develop it after that, it's just on our own. How we decide to take it after we learn, how we want to take it from there. So I think that's really important on language acquisition, and I think that in English, as English teachers or any language teacher, it's a topic that we have to really go into depth to study, to actually give an effective teaching to our students and have them acquire, as just the whole like mythology says, acquire it properly. And I think that's very important. And excuse the little inconvenience.
Yes, Gabby, well, you have a very good point. I would like to conclude, and I must say that learning a new language is difficult, and it's frustrating fact that it's always seems like the mission to be fluent, and it's never ending. However, the knowledge basis is formative, and it's beneficial for everyone to have at least a small taste, rather while they are young. Therefore, language acquisition is the process whereby children learn their native language and consists of abstracting structural information from the language they hear around them and adopting this information for later use.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're really right about that. And I actually think that in conclusion to all this, um, language acquisition is just like the door to the other strategies that develop, like the other strategies we used to teach. It developed because our students are first gonna actually understand the language and like learn how to, like, what it means and how to communicate, to eventually develop it to other structures that develop into other strategies that forms the ultimate language user, which will be speaking, writing, listening, reading. And that's like it enables a whole package of communication in a different language. But it starts here. I think this is like one of the most important things topics teachers should go into, and any student in language, because it would open doors to other meaningful strategies for them to use.
Correct. Yes. Okay, Gabby. So I think it will be it. It's nice talking to you again.
Yeah, me too, Miriam. Have a good night.
See you. Good night. Bye bye.